In the last video, we talked about anchoring, and linguistically, that term is unmarked. It is normative. To achieve its opposite, you have to mark it, you have to change it, you have to make it unanchoring or de-anchoring, you have to add a prefix. There is no negative word that is completely opposite to anchoring. Anchoring is the unmarked form, it is the normative form. Unanchoring or de-anchoring or something would have to be the marked form, the opposite form. So when I frame things linguistically, or to reference Heidegger, when I end-frame things, and I end-frame the discussion starting with this foundation or this axiom, this word anchoring, the implicit association is that I'm defending anchoring, or I'm stating that anchoring is the normative, it is the norm, that as the pendulum of history swings back and forth, we're essentially going to return to some form of anchoring. And in this video, I want to turn that around and look at the other perspective. Of course, anchoring is a limiting principle, and therefore it is thanatic, it is deathly. It weighs you down, it limits you. It is a particular, it is a specific, it's not a universal. And so it attaches you and it weighs you down and it ties you to a specific thing, which cuts off degrees of freedom. So there is a deathly element to anchoring, even though we consider it in league with the familiar, the familial, the good, the beautiful. I've talked about this before in reference to Greek art, that Greek sculpture is about cutting away that which is ugly, cutting away that which is out of ratio. Ratio is a deathly principle. It cuts away those things which are outside itself, and it leaves only that which is pure. And so you can only achieve ratio, you can only achieve beauty in art and sculpture in the Greek sense, in the classical sense, through death, through the cutting principle, which, we see that again in Darwinian evolution and those sort of models. So, as this insect or bee or something buzzes around, and I might just let it go. See if I can let it go. There we go. We were talking about the opposite of anchoring. Oh, it's the water. There we go. So anyway, as we were talking about an inversion of anchoring, now dissolution itself, the word dissolution, does have a prefix, dis, but to speak of a solution has quite a different meaning. And so even though dissolution is a marked version of solution, dissolution has taken on a meaning, and we can hear this in the emphasis, the way that we pronounce the word. We don't pronounce it dissolution, we pronounce it dissolution. So it's taken on its own character phonetically. It's its own word. So this phenomenon of dissolution is really interesting, in which values become inverted. We lose our anchoring. We lose our anchoring in everything. Anchoring becomes attacked. Anchoring, it becomes the enemy. So dissolution is a creative, and it is therefore a life giving, a life affirming process. Again, in reference to our understanding the thanatic principle and the principle of eros in contradistinction, the what we might say the hypocrisy there implicit within the two principles, that they create their opposite in a sense. But dissolution is a force for life. It is about stripping away particulars, stripping away specifics, expansion. So dissolution is against all of those things which are anchors. So if you identify something which is an anchor, dissolution is that force which comes about to destroy the anchor. It is the anti-anchoring force. And this is what we see in society, and this is basically what people are very upset about, is the way that dissolution comes and destroys anchors, whether these anchors are religious or cultural or gendered or whatever they are, whatever kind of anchoring we have, dissolution comes along, the spirit of dissolution comes and removes our anchors. Now we can particularize the spirit of dissolution to particular histories, to particular processes, to particular interactions of cultural forces. Historically, when we talk about dissolution in a Western context, to understand this, we sort of do need to look back to not just the dark ages, so to speak, but we also need to look back to the Greeks, because the Greeks had their own period of dissolution. And we could even go earlier than this, but this is really as early as I've gone, is to look at the Greeks in their period of dissolution. Now, I want to reference three characters, Heidegger, Kaczynski, and McLuhan. And I want to introduce the concept that language is a form of technology, first of all. That second of all, literary culture is an expansion of language. That then, when we talk about I guess it's a Marxist materialist analysis in some way, that the Gutenberg press was a material condition which allowed for the Protestant Reformation. It's an anti-idealist analysis, but I think that the materialist and the idealist analysis are almost have more in common with one another, so long as you have your facts straight. And you simply, to invert one to the other, you simply have to say, well, the idea of the typewriter existed before the typewriter. You just add some Platonism to it in order to get one out of the other. But I actually don't think that in terms of understanding progressions of consequences, cause and effect, I don't think that these two necessarily, because the one is sort of dependent on the other. It's either the material results from the ideal or the ideal results from the material, but always there's an interplay of the two, and so they acknowledge both of them rather than being, there is such thing as a pure materialist position, because the materialist position is always in reference to ideals, deconstructing them to bring about their material components, and the idealist does the same thing. He breaks down the material system in order to understand its ideal components, and I guess it's the contradiction between deductive and inductive reasoning. But I think there's an interplay there that makes them. I like to see the cooperative element between the two rather than the contradictory element between the two. So we're talking about Marxism. We're talking about the Gutenberg press. This is a technology that leads to a change in religion, that leads to a loss of anchoring, and the creation of new anchors. Protestantism as a new anchor for Northern Europe. So we're looking at these different things, and I guess my critique of Kaczynski is that literary culture and writing itself is a form of technology which Kaczynski engages in, and you cannot escape this. And referring to Heidegger, we are enframed within this, we are trapped within this. To critique Heidegger, Heidegger talks about technological enframing. He talks about the danger to human free will that technology proposes, because it could it could remove the human element from our society and replace it with a purely technological element. But when he says that, I think what he fails to understand is that language itself is a technology. The progression from language to writing to the Gutenberg press to the present technological advances that we're seeing now and that we've seen in the modern world with warfare and information. All of this is a continuum. All of this is coming out of language itself. And of course, language itself has earlier precedents in the animal kingdom, and we can even say that DNA is a kind of language, and we can even classify the laws of the universe as a kind of a syntax and therefore an analogous structure to language. So yes, it is true that technology has a deathly element, which is why John David Ebert has rightly pointed out that we do dream of technological apocalypse. We have dreams of the Terminator and iRobot and technology scaring, taking over. And so this is sort of a logical consequence of the desire for self-preservation, that we do legitimately see technology as a threat. But the idea that you can, as Kaczynski strived and as Heidegger strived, is you try to go against that, and you try to invert it or go back or stop it or put a halt to it or come to some sort of synthesis, some kind of archaeo-futurist synthesis where you take technology and you use it against itself to limit it or to regulate it. So the anti-technologists, whether it's Heidegger, whether it's Kaczynski, I think they're deeply flawed in that they have a very limited definition of technology that creates a black and white distinction where there is none, where actually technology is a continuum starting with language itself, extending through the invention of writing, extending through the Gutenberg press, the information revolution, and the changes in warfare that have come with that. So I see it as a huge continuum stretching back to the ancient Greeks. And I see the fall of Greek culture from a Greek high culture to the Greek, fall, essentially. It has